especially after 9/11, tried to link the global narrative of terrorism with the freedom struggle in Kashmir. And let's be honest, given its clout and power and lobbies, it did dent Pakistan's image abroad. Today, a year from August 5th, there is no Western country, there is no newspaper, and there is no media, electronic media channel of note that has not called the Indian government fascist, that has not talked about the reign of terror that they have spread, quite frankly, throughout India, but illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir specifically. And the very voices, I saw this myself in the United States, the very voices in the United States Congress and Senate and the UK Parliament, who would not talk about anything but the Indian narrative. Every conversation would start from what is Pakistan doing across the LOC, have now pointedly passed resolutions, written letters, and talked about the real face of the so-called secular democracy. The narrative of India in the world has never been more challenged and more negative than it is today. And please, not for a second should you think that this is happening without an effort. Number one, by the Kashmiris themselves and the Kashmiri diaspora around the world, but second, with full political, diplomatic and moral support of the government and the state of Pakistan. Second, what is Pakistan's narrative? Only two. Number one, human rights violations against the Kashmiris. The corona epidemic was used by the Modi government to essentially increase the level of oppression and violations of human rights of the Kashmiris in the illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. If some of you are not familiar, I would suggest you go back today and Google something called the typhus epidemic during World War II and read what the Nazi regime was saying about that epidemic being spread by the Jews and how it was done. And you will find that the language that you've gotten from Indian officials, BJP officials, senior officials about Muslims spreading corona is identical. So when the Prime Minister of Pakistan talks about the Nazi-inspired Modi regime, there are historical facts backing that day in and day out. India is liable, given that it's an occupied territory under the 4th Geneva Convention, Article 55-56, to ensure all medical and emergency supplies in a pandemic situation to people of IOJK, illegally occupied Kashmir. Not only that, under Article 59, groups like Doctors Without Borders and others in the international community, they are mandated to allow them to go in and provide that relief that they are unable to or unwilling to provide. So the second narrative Pakistan has is that India is breaching international law, not only in terms of the UN resolutions, but every single day in terms of how they have handled the illegally occupied territory since August 5th. Third, the world talked about and does talk about India, especially the United States and others, as the net security provider. That's the term that they coined. They've talked about the Indo-Pacific strategy, where they're joining hands with India to check China's expansion rise. But here's the question I asked the international community in my interactions. You've got a country in South Asia that called itself the regional pivot, has a confrontation with China and gets the result that it did, eggs on a infinitely smaller neighbor to stand up, produce a new map, and a Nepalese parliament to reject India's standpoint, view and aggression towards Nepal. Even Bangladesh is having problems with this country, and last year you saw this country claim that it conducted airstrikes against another nuclear country. You've seen the result last year with Pakistan, but you've also seen how devious the mindset is. That you trigger a crisis, you are found woefully inadequate, you lose the crisis, you have a pilot down. In our magnanimity, we return the pilot, and a political party spins it to win the election and declare a hero out of somebody who was returned voluntarily by Pakistan. That tells you how devious the intent, mindset, and how misleading the narrative is for the Indian citizen itself. What has happened with China, they are trying to do exactly the same. Of course, not succeeding this time, but trying exactly the same. So, if I were to bring all of this together, we are seeing a country that is moving in a direction where actually, inshallah, the cause of self-determination of Kashmir is being fulfilled by the very country that thinks that it has taken control of the illegally occupied territory. Where the Kashmiris stood a year ago to where it stands today, let me give you 3 categorical, irreversible differences. If there was anybody in the Kashmir Valley that did not outright hate India, that category of people has vanished forever. I'm giving you, this is information, credible knowledge that we have and has been portrayed publicly by others as well. Second, the support for Pakistan is highest in recent history. I'll give you a very, very small anecdote. It's very interesting, and I actually didn't know this at the time, but this time Pakistan celebrated Eid one day before India. Eid was on Sunday. The Eid al-Fitr was on Sunday here, which was, if I recall correctly, the same as the Middle East. But India and Bangladesh had it on Monday. Kashmir declared Eid on Sunday. Literally minutes after, I think our Eid was declared at 10:30 at night or whatever, it habitually delayed. But 10 minutes or 15 minutes after that, the Muslims of Kashmir, illegally occupied Kashmir in the valley, declared Eid in solidarity with Pakistan. And when I asked people about this, they said this wasn't to spite India. This was actually to support Pakistan. That's the second major change. And the third major change is that I'm the first one to confess that the response that we've gotten from the world is not nearly as humane, as moralistic, and as positive as it should have been in a fairer world. It's definitely not. The world is still turning a blind eye towards the kind of atrocities and oppression that the Kashmiris are facing every day. And if they weren't, ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you, why hasn't India allowed foreign journalists to go and see what is happening? Why hasn't the UN been allowed to go in? Why is Amnesty saying what it's saying? This is the largest open jail in the world. There can be no two views about it. But the third difference that I want to end on is very important. No Western media or press outlet is using the word terrorism for Kashmir anymore. Even the most allied of allies of India cannot stand up in support of what is happening. If they are not opposing them, they are not supporting them. And while there has been very little tangible action, and that's deplorable by the international community, each one of them have told us that what India is doing is not sustainable. We don't condone it. We will continue to press India on human rights violations. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the beginning of the end. And the end is self-determination of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Thank you very much.